Well, hello everyone. My name is Paul Robeck. I'm with the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension, and I am the chair of the ESP National Professional Development Committee. It's our pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar. Again, please take a moment to drop your name and institution in the chat box. As a reminder, everyone is welcome to participate. Our presenter today will be asking a few questions along the way that you'll be able to uh, participate in the chat box as well as unmuting yourself. A couple of reminders for you. It's the beginning of the year, so if you haven't renewed your ESP membership, now is a great time to do that. The other exciting thing that's going on right now at the start of the year is that we are currently accepting proposals for this fall's ESP National Conference as well as the next webinar series. So if you have something that you want to share with your national colleagues, we'd really encourage you to go to the national website and check out the links to the two RFPs for both the national conference, which will be in Fort Worth, Texas, and then also the national webinar series. It's my pleasure today to welcome Kaitlyn Peine. I think I pronounced that good. All right, thanks for
Yeah.
the thumbs up. I was practicing before everyone joined, who will be sharing with us extension agent retention research study practices that improve job satisfaction and agent longevity. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kaitlyn.
Okay. Awesome. We will go ahead and get started. So, as Paul mentioned, my name is Kaitlyn Peine. I am a local unit extension agent, specifically over our community health and wellness programs here for our team in Douglas County. If you're not familiar with Kansas, that's kind of the northeast section of Kansas where we're at. About an hour south of Kansas City, situated here. Also, if you ever hear of the Jayhawks, KU, they're actually in our community. So, but I do work for K-State Research and Extension, and I'm here today to share a little bit about an extension agent retention study that I conducted, specifically focusing on practices that improve job satisfaction and agent longevity. We'll go ahead and get started here. Okay, so before I dive into the details of the research, I do want to acknowledge what journey brought me to the point to where we're at today. So in 2020, I actually decided in the middle of a pandemic, blessing us with its presence, that I wanted to go back to grad school. It seemed like a great thing to add to my plate. Um, and ended up working on a master's in agriculture education with an emphasis in extension education. There is such a thing. It sounds super nerdy. It is, but I loved it. And I knew that I would likely be in extension work for the rest of my career. It is very focused and is actually through the Great Plains Ag Idea, where I had the opportunity to take classes from several land grant universities, not just Kansas State University, and really dive into extension work. So in 2023, December of 2023, I actually graduated with my master's. And essentially, my research and thesis was about extension agent retention. What made me want to study extension agent retention is really a couple of things. One, extension has actually been my only career. I graduated with my undergrad back in 2009 and joined extension at that point and have been an agent since then. And pretty early on in my career, I had the opportunity to start mentoring and orienting new agents to our system. And while I would love everybody to stay, I realized pretty early on that we have a lot of folks leave our system. And as somebody who has stayed, I really wanted to focus on what makes people stay versus why people leave. At K-State Research and Extension, we actually host exit interviews when somebody leaves our system, and we have a plethora of data that tells us why folks leave. We did not have any really good data that showed us good practices and best practices for making folks stay. So a little bit about what brought me here. I also today we utilize a new agent coaching team instead of that traditional one-on-one mentor assignment that we used to have. I've served on that team since it started and continue helping new agents, specifically in that first 18 months of their career, joining our organization. Okay, so there's a little participation at the beginning of this, and then again at the end. Everything in the middle is a lot of information that you will have the opportunity to consume. So because there are so many of us here, I am going to ask you to utilize your chat box and throw in there, why did you consider extension as a career? And we'll give like 2 minutes to do this. And our colleague Alex is going to help summarize just a few things because I actually don't have the chat box open. Okay, Alex, I see some good things coming in. What are you seeing?
um, ways to it was a way to teach, not in a traditional classroom setting. um, Great way to interface and work with communities. The variety of work that you get to do, helping others, giving back, flexibility, are just some of the outreach,
Awesome.
serving in their
So
own community. Yep.
perfect. A lot of us can probably resonate with almost everything that is listed there. We're not in a classroom, but we get to teach folks. We have a lot of flexibility. We're making a difference in our community. All of those pieces hold very true. Now I'm going to ask you, what makes you stay? And drop that in the chat box, and we'll wait a minute or two here and debrief on that too.
Looks like a lot of flexibility, autonomy, enjoying colleagues and the community, having purpose, feeling like they're making a difference are some of the highlights.
Awesome. Nobody listed 4-H parents in there? Oh, okay. I just had to throw that out there. We will definitely reflect on those a little bit here. So the flexibility is definitely a huge piece, and actually that'll come up in my research too. Okay, I wanted to share a little bit about what makes me stay. So this past summer, I celebrated my 15th year working for K-State Research and Extension. And I will tell you, I started the first 12 years of my career as a 4-H youth development agent. And I don't know about the states where you all are from, but most folks don't stay in 4-H work that long in our system. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of evenings. It's high conflict or tends to be. But at the end of the day, it's really for me about the people that I work with every day. And local unit office culture is going to come up in the research that we're going to talk about. But we all know that if we don't feel a sense of belonging, there's really not going to be a lot of happiness in our jobs. And those folks that you're working with day in and day out, it really is important that you have a good relationship and a trusting environment. And of course, I love working in our community. So a couple of years ago, I actually had the opportunity to move over from a 4-H youth development role to a community health and wellness position, and actually still do very similar work, but work with adult audiences now and less of a full-time concentration on the 4-H youth development program. But really getting the opportunity to serve the community that I work and live in is really important to me, and something that I appreciate too. Okay, so we're going to dive in here. Paul, will there be an opportunity for us to share the slide deck at the end? I don't want to offer a false promise here.
I know the
Maybe.
recording will be available. Yeah, we should be able to email out the presentation as well.
Okay. Okay, for sure. And I will also fully disclose, if you sat in on this session during our national meeting, it's going to be very similar. So you may want to like either go get a cup of coffee or go find something else to do. But I wanted to disclose that. I'm happy to share at the end my slide deck. And if you really want to dive into my thesis, you could read over 100 pages of my words with this research too. So I've actually had folks reach out afterwards wanting that. So don't hesitate to drop me an email and I can share that. So we'll start off here sharing our current situation. So our system here with K-State Research and Extension is experiencing record high turnover rates in local unit agent positions. So our system-wide is still very grassroots based, and we may have more local unit agents or educators compared to your system, or we may even have less. So of the 220 extension agent positions, 91 of our agents have less than 5 years of experience. 74 of those 91 have less than 3 years of experience. So we have a lot of new folks around. From August 2021 to August 23, our system hired 98 new extension agents. We know that when an agent leaves our system, we have a financial loss of more than $7,500. And that's really just a financial investment from our state administration to onboard new agents. That does not include a local unit's financial loss of not having an agent in their office, and a minimum of 12 weeks to hire somebody. As dreamy as it is to think we could interview and a board could make a decision and we could have somebody on board the next week, that's not the reality of our onboarding process. So we're looking at about 12 weeks of not having somebody in a position, and that's really a minimum. Reality often suggests that that takes longer. So down here, we also have a quote from Vines et al. Saying a high level of agent turnover is costly to the extension organization, both in resources expended and institutional knowledge lost. Further, agent turnover disrupts the function of a local community. Okay, why agents leave K-State Research and Extension. So this is going back to that exit interview data that I talked about at the beginning. So anytime an agent exits our system, we're going to send them a survey to collect information about why they're leaving. And none of this is really surprising. So our system has a co-governance structure. So agents are actually going to be answering to both K-State Research and Extension Administration and a locally elected board. That structure also, the co-governance structure, also lends itself to issues with relationships with colleagues, boards, stakeholders, and volunteers. We also know folks exit our system because of a lack of work-life integration. I don't call it a balance. If you dig into HR resource, using the term work-life balance is really a false title. Like, is anything ever balanced? But really looking at that integration and what a healthy integration looks like for an individual who has is satisfied personally as well as professionally. We also know folks leave our system because of the salary. We also understand that there are relationships with local unit directors that also cause folks to leave. So inconsistent management practices and micromanagement. We have what we call area directors, which are more of a regional set, and some folks may be reporting to somebody who's at a regional level, and some folks may be reporting to a local unit director that is in their office, depending on the number of folks they have on their team. But this is also very, this aligns very well when we look at HR research, that tells us that if we are not happy with our boss or our director in general, we are less likely to stay in a position. And then lastly, and probably not super surprising, folks leave our system because of their responsibilities with 4-H. There's notes of continual conflict, draws time away from other program areas, a culture of non-inclusiveness, primary focus of extension boards that I mentioned earlier, lack of time actually spent with youth, and then state office support. Okay, so the purpose of this research study is to understand practices and factors that result in retention for folks serving in local unit extension agent positions. This is a collective case study. I had 3 research questions that I set out to answer. So the first is, how has engagement and professional development influenced the success of agents? The second question I studied is, how do organizational culture and office culture impact agent job satisfaction? And lastly, I looked at the relationship between an agent and their supervisor and how that affects agent retention. We'll talk a little bit about the research that already exists. So we know that the Great Resignation started in early 2021 as a result of the pandemic. Employees quit jobs in search of higher wages, better benefits, and a more flexible work schedule. We also looked at organizational culture here. So organizational culture is defined as a set of shared values about how employees should act and standards for what is expected within an organization. There's a science of care study that shares that strong organizational culture results in an overall better employee experience and more highly engaged employees who felt like they belonged. And the study reported 86% of participants responded that an organization's culture determines if they want to stay in a position. I studied organizational loyalty, which we'll dig into a little bit, but this is really the different types of loyalty that an individual could feel towards staying in a position. So we have affective, which is a positive attitude and appreciation for the organization, which the majority of the folks I talked to actually shared this type of loyalty. Continuance. So believe it or not, I talked to one individual that said they were only staying on because they were super close to retirement. So some sort of job related benefit that is keeping them there. Maybe it's health insurance, maybe it's the retirement package, whatever the case is. There's a fear of missing out on that job benefit. And then normative, actually the least popular in the study that I conducted, is just a sense of obligation, like they felt like they had to stay in a position. Okay, so the conceptual framework for this study is actually a retains model. If you are somebody who works in HR for an extension institution, I would encourage you to look up Owen and Safrat's retains model. There's lots of published articles out there that you can read. But essentially, retains breaks down each letter in the word retains and offers a practice to help improve extension agent retention specifically. So the letter R talks about recruiting authentically. E is expand on new employees' experiences. So really thinking about what their personal interests and goals are and what experiences they're bringing to the table that they could contribute to the organization. T is for train. A is for advocating for both the employee and the position, ensuring that the employee and their position grows and evolves with the organization. I think we can all agree that extension, no 2 days are the same. So knowing that our work will continue to evolve to meet the needs of our local community. I is for inspire, invest in, and empower employees. N is for nurture connectivity among employees. I already talked about that sense of belonging. We know in our educational programming, if we don't have folks feeling like they belong, they're not going to continue along the learning spectrum. Very similar when we think about growing as a professional. If we're worried about not belonging in our workplace, growing as a professional is going to be very difficult. And lastly here is S, shows appreciation through effective recognition. Okay, so this is a collective case study design. The population included 94 extension agents who have been employed with our system for at least 5 or more years. At the time I collected this research data, we actually had a professional development organization that conducted a quantitative study that really dug into folks who had been with our system for less than 5 years. So I chose the target population to be folks who had been with our system for at least 5 years. Another reason is that was really putting us out pre-pandemic. And we know that hiring and onboarding was weird for all of our organizations during that time frame. So keeping that out of this research was also very intentional, knowing that that is likely something to study, but not at this point. The folks that I went out and talked to, the sample population included 24 local unit agents. So for data collection, participants were invited based on an equitable representation of demographic data, which I'll share here just in a little bit. 24 agents were invited and all accepted. Some did try to pawn it off on their coworker in their office, but I explained that they were chosen for a particular reason, and everybody accepted. I was able to conduct 20 of these interviews in person, and I want to acknowledge I was able to take a 3-week study leave to collect my data. Our organization has that as an employee benefit. And our administration actually paid for my travel during data collection too. So they were financially invested not only in my time as an employee, but also in the travel expense of going out and collecting this data in person. That was something that was important to me. And I really do feel like the conversations I was able to have in person were much richer than they would have been if I would have conducted all of the research on Zoom. So 4 folks did participate in interviews on Zoom. And then the time frame was for data collection was really February through March of 2023. Alex, I'm going to pause here. Is there anything in the chat that we need to address? Are we feeling good?
No questions.
Okay, awesome. I will give space at the end here to ask questions too, but if there's something on your mind and you want to drop it in the chat, go ahead and do that too. I just don't have the chat pulled up, so I'm not ignoring it. All right, we'll dive into study participant demographics here. So I looked at program area representation and then gender. So in our system, we really have 4 primary areas for programmatic responsibilities. And that could range anywhere from horticulture, which is in the purple, 4-H youth development, which is in the gray, agriculture is in the more khaki color, and then family and consumer science. I also want to acknowledge here that in some of our smaller units, you may only see 1 to 2 agents, and they end up having a split appointment. So they may be a family and consumer science agent and a 4-H youth development agent. Same thing with agriculture and natural resources. They may also have 4-H youth development responsibilities. Here we have the age range of study participants. So 21% were between 30 to 40 years old, 29% were 41 to 50, then 51 to 60, we have 25, and then 61 and older were 25% of the study participants, which really, if you look at that, that tells me that we are an aging population for folks who are staying in our system. We also have years of service here. So we have a breakdown between 5 to 10, 11 to 20, 21 to 30, and then folks I talked to who had been in our organization for more than 31 years. K-State Research and Extension is currently split into 3 regions. So we have Central, Eastern, and Western. That's just really just geographic information for folks to be split into. And then our organization also offers either a county or district structure. So county is still going to be just a county. A district is really a group of counties coming together to make one local unit. So for interview protocol, I started with semi-structured interviews, which were guided by 22 scripted interview questions. So this was a lot of follow-up questions depending on how folks were responding, but 22 main questions. I actually learned through my graduate work that there is a handy little app called Otter AI. If you ever need to host focus groups or anything like that as an agent, I actually have used this since then for some research that we've conducted locally, but it will literally record and transcribe all of the interview information that you're collecting. And I ended up with over 500 pages of transcripts, which was really overwhelming. I didn't think I would have that much data, but themes actually rose to the top relatively easily. Okay, so this is a qualitative data analysis. And the way I actually was able to create themes is through a thematic analysis process, which probably sounds pretty boring if you're not into research. But first, it starts off with open coding, which is identifying concepts, developing categories, and naming core themes. Then we go into axial coding, which is further categorization of themes and making connections between different codes. And then lastly, selective coding, which is connecting all themes under one main category. Okay, so before we dive into the results, we are going to do a little stretch break here because I am a community health and wellness agent. So if you don't have your camera on, that's totally cool. But if you could take just a minute to move your body with me, this is what we call a coconut stretch break. And essentially, we are going to spell out the word coconut with our bodies. So first up, you're going to make the letter C. And then you make the letter O. And then you can do the letter C the other direction. This may be the only thing you take away from the presentation. That's cool. Another O. And then the N, I always tell people, like, just get creative. Whatever feels right to you. And then the U. And then the T. I always like to kind of like pivot around there. Hopefully you have a big desk and you're not knocking over anything. All right, good work, good work. Okay, so the research actually lifted up 6 different themes. The first is relationships with directors, relationships with extension council boards. Those are those locally appointed or elected boards I was talking about. Access to professional development, organizational culture, organizational loyalty, and lastly, work practices. Okay, if you're somebody who likes to screenshot things, this is probably where you want to have your little screenshot thing ready. So these next pieces here, I'm going to go over each of the themes, and then I essentially pulled out participant quotes to tell a story. So first, we're going to talk about relationships with directors. A relationship between a director and their agent influences an agent's job satisfaction. Study participants appreciate a trustworthy relationship with their director that includes a genuine interest in the agent's work and a shared vision for K-State Research and Extension. So participant B here says, I feel like there's accountability on both sides. We have a director who is interested in what we are doing. She sets up routine coaching sessions where we can check in, update her on what's happening, and communicate any needs. I have a good relationship with our local unit director. We have the same vision for what Extension could be. We have a trusting relationship, and I know if she says she's going to do something, she's going to follow through. And I'm not a local unit director, but I do supervise lots of folks. And this is something that I always keep in the back of my mind. If I say I'm going to do something, it is really important as a supervisor to build trust that we follow through with that. Even if it's not on the exact timeline you originally committed to, just keeping your team in that open line of communication for when they can expect things to be done, I think is really important to build that trust. Okay, so here's the deal. Not everyone has a good supervisor that I talk to. I would say I'm not supervised. My relationship with my director is non-existent. It seems our director only has conversations with one agent and does not communicate with the rest of us. I also talk to folks who in the moment had a good director, but could reflect back on a time when they had a director that was not great. A previous director we had was terrible at the time, and our office culture was toxic. I was verbally attacked many times and witnessed this behavior with colleagues. The only thing that made me stay was the relationship with the clients I serve. Okay, now we're going to talk about relationships with Extension Council boards. Inevitable turnover on Extension Council boards makes orienting and building relationships with board members an onboarding, oh my goodness, an ongoing process. New board members bring a fresh perspective and new ideas. Agents want board members to be advocates for Extension while keeping focus on the bigger picture and mission of the organization. So here's the thing that kind of complicates this as you consume this information. In a district, there is not a term limit the way our statute is written. There's not a term limit for folks on a district extension council board. However, those of us that are still in a county structure, there is a term limit. So I'll say that out loud before I read the next part. In a district, you can get a toxic board member on a board, and the extension law doesn't set a limit term, so they could technically stay on forever. I think relationships with boards ebbs and flows depending on the culture of who's on the board, and there have been some good times and some bad times. I think it all depends. Next up, we're going to talk about access to professional development. There is a culture that shares an expectation of continual growth. Agents are encouraged to explore training that aligns with their professional growth and goals and programmatic expertise. Not all local units have budgets to support agent professional development, especially outside of the state. And I know I have quite a bit of travel coming up, and it's just getting more and more expensive to go out of state, right? By the time you get on a plane, you pay for a national conference registration fee, per diem, all the things. Like we're talking over $2,000 in this day and age. And the reality is the way our system is set up in Kansas, most of that's going to fall on a local unit board, and some of their budgets just won't tolerate that kind of expense when we look at agent professional development. So here participants talk about, I think our culture toward continued growth is probably one of the best kept secrets our organization has. I met a group of agents at a conference, and it turned out we are all family and consumer science agents. In 2014, we decided to start a newsletter, and we still collaborate on this project today. Lastly, there is such a huge difference in funding for different unit sizes. Larger counties and districts have more money to spend to send agents to bigger professional development versus smaller units that that are having budget issues. The smaller units can't afford to send agents. I think there is a disparity there, and it causes hard feelings.
Kaitlyn, do you have a moment for a couple questions that are in the chat?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, yep, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. Let's take a
Great.
pause here.
Sure. So it's actually in the prior slide regarding the boards,
Yeah,
extension council boards.
for sure.
One question was, how powerful are they? Can they actually fire extension agents?
Yes. So the way K-State Research and Extension is set up, our local unit boards basically can hire and fire. Now, I will tell you the termination process does have to involve our regional administration, which are essentially representation from campus and administration. So there does have to be a conversation there. But if you hear local units in Kansas, local unit agents talk in Kansas, yes. We share that they hire and fire folks. We like to focus on the hiring versus the firing piece, but they do have a lot of power.
Interesting, thanks. And then there's a question about term limits. So if the
Mhm.
term limit is such an issue, is there any discussion about working to get the law changed?
No, they really don't want to change our current law the way it is for districting. And there's a variety of different reasons for that, but that could be a little tricky to open up Pandora's box, is my understanding. But good question. What other questions do we have?
There's one other question on a prior slide. When you're going over your participant demographics,
Mhm.
about 1/4 of the people were nearing retirement. Is that representative of the organization overall? And uh, the question was wondering if that's similar to extension across the country.
Mhm. Yes, I would tell you, I did not spend a lot of time stressing out about demographic data, but the way it shook out, you would think I did. Because that's also very similar to what we see in our system when we look at folks who have been employed system-wide 5 years or more. So yes, we do have lots of folks who are knocking on the door of retirement. Is it a third? That could be a little high. I'd have to have our HR person, who's actually Jennifer Wilson. I'd have to have Jennifer pull that up for me again. But the reality is we do have lots of folks who are knocking on the door of retirement eligibility for sure.
Thanks. And then one other question came in. Can you speak to the culture of non-inclusiveness as one of the reasons folks left their positions in 4-H?
I'm not really able to tie much more into that. Other than that was just a theme that lifted from exit interview data, but what the meanings behind that particular theme, I couldn't really dive into that personally. I know that's not super helpful, but I don't want to make any assumptions based off of my own experience to skew what that might be. Anything else?
I believe that's it.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. I think we're here now. Awesome. And keep dumping those in the chat box. And here at the end, we'll leave some time for some questions too. Okay, organizational culture. Local unit organizational culture is understood. There are varied opinions that exist about the area and state level organizational culture. And keeping in mind that organizational culture is really the concept of everybody being on the same page and agreeing on the values and mission of the organization. Another theme that lifted up here is that local unit directors influence organizational culture. So for a couple of years, we had a toxic district director. I watched talented and long tenured agents leave our organization because of poor leadership. There's never been a question about what administration expects agents to do. You are expected to come to work and serve in the community you work in. We do have shared values on our team. We are very teamwork oriented and are willing to help each other out. It helps that we have competent and capable people in our unit. And lastly, here in our unit, we focus on meeting people where they are at and trying to find what meets their needs and expectations and still doing it within equity. Okay, so here we dive into why are people saying, what's causing that loyalty? There is a genuine appreciation for K-State research and extension. Agents shared a passion for working with people and leading change to improve their local communities, which if you reflect back on our 2 prompt questions at the beginning of the webinar, these are all themes that came up, right? People like helping others, they like serving their local communities. This is not surprising if you are in our work. For participant quotes here, we have, I stay because of the people I help. That's what's kept me here so long. I know we are making a difference in the work we do. Another participant shares, I love the job. I love working with producers. You'd be amazed how many people just stop by. We are here in the courthouse. They just stop by to chat because we have built those relationships. When I go to the grocery store, church, or even a school activity, folks talk to me, and it's because of the connection to this position. If I wasn't so close to retirement age, I would have left. And I already shared this story. I don't know that I believe the state office sees the turnover problem. It's not just the pay, it's a lot. It's the lack of training. I think it's the lack of expectations of what to do for the new person coming in. I will always be passionate about working with young people. I have a personality where I could never be stuck, say, in a classroom all day. I just think extension is so unique and has all the opportunities. It's fascinating to be able to work with people to be able to work with young people in this capacity. Okay, so another thing that I focused on here are work practices that allow for job satisfaction, essentially. So what are work practices that are common between these folks who have stayed in our system for a variety of different number of years? Agents shared work practices that they felt led to agent longevity. But I also asked people like, why do you think others get burnt out in this job? Or what makes you get burnt out in this job? So there's a variety of different responses here, but the themes that came out of work practices, when we look at what is influencing folks to stay, we have celebrating success, building relationships, professional scheduling, managing expectations, and then professional creativity. So celebrating success, we have a person on our team whose love language is acknowledgement. We nominated her for a county award and she won. It was great. And you could tell it made her feel really good about the effort she puts into her position. Here we have an individual talking about relationships with people. You must be a people person. If you don't like people, this probably isn't a good gig for you, right? If you don't like to work with people, if you don't like to talk to people, if you're not going to make the connection that is needed for them to come back and ask more questions, this is not going to be the right position. So K-State Research and Extension has a professional scheduling policy that allows agents to be away from their desk for up to 4 hours at a time and not take annual or sick leave, recognizing that most weeks result in 40 or more hours of work. And professional scheduling came up in a lot of our conversations, and the flexibility for folks to have that work-life integration that I talked about. And whether they have kids at home, whether they don't, whether they're married, whether they're single, whatever the case is, like you still have to take care of you as a person. And having that flexibility really meant a lot to folks who have stayed in our system. For managing expectations, this actually is an individual I can reflect on who has been in the system for more years than I've been alive. And they talked about when they first got to extension many moons ago, they would come to their desk and they would have a stack of slips from phone calls that came in that they would need to return, and how technology has really shifted the connective behavior that we now have with the clients that we're serving. And it's really hard to not let the job consume you in that environment, knowing that there's this sense of like 24/7 access, and where is that line drawn? And lastly, professional creativity. I think we can all agree that extension gives us space to be creative. Okay, so for discussion here, we talk about how has engagement and professional development influenced the success of agents. Agents want access to be better professionals, and they need access to professional development. We do recognize that there's a discrepancy regarding access depending on what that local unit budget looks like. It's also important when we reflect back on the retains model that we think about training beyond the first year of an agent's employment. I think all of our organizations have some sort of orientation process for new folks, but it's important we think of that growth beyond first year of employment. Two here, the agents want to be a part of a local unit team that is inclusive and team-oriented. And then study participants acknowledge the importance of celebrating work success. And I know that's actually a habit that we've changed on our team here locally, is being more intentional about recognizing and lifting up success. I think it's really easy for us to get wrapped up into that next thing that's coming on our calendar, and to not stop and reflect and think, gosh, that went really well, and share with our colleagues about that success. The relationship between an agent and a supervisor. Agents expect directors to be approachable, communicative, and trustworthy. A huge thing here in our system, if you're a smaller unit that has less than 5 agents, you will not have a director with supervisory responsibilities on your team, and instead, you're going to be reporting to a regional director. A local unit director who's in the same office or in the same district is going to be more accessible and knowledgeable of day-to-day unit operations, whereas a regional director, that relationship tends to be more transactional in nature. So the agent may have a question, they reach out and get an answer, but that ongoing coaching and knowledge of day-to-day is just not there. So I do want to recognize that this study is limited to the experience of the study participants and the uniqueness of each local unit and our local community. So recommendations for future research, if anyone's looking for some research to do. I only collected the perspective of an agent. I do think to better understand the relationship between the agent and the supervisor, we need to get more research and data from the supervisor, because it's likely, I can tell you, just talking with my local unit director, they probably feel overextended, right? And they're trying to help a lot of people on their team, and they may not be able to meet the expectations of each staff person. I did not talk about money. That's something that I think the reality is could influence why folks stay. Summary here is that employee turnover is a challenge, and it is present in today's workforce. It's not unique to extension. Agents expect access to high quality professional development, to a supervisor who is accessible and a leader, an organizational culture that is understood and practiced at all levels of an organization. Best practices and systems are needed to ensure access to professional development, strengthen organizational culture, and support director development. Oops. Okay, so before I open up the chat here, if you could actually, let's pause here. What? So Alex, I'm going to ask them. Let's open up for questions. Let's tackle the questions in the chat box. Sorry, I'm processing this. Let's tackle those, and then I'll ask what people are taking home. Otherwise, I think we're going to lose those questions. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yes. The only question right now is about, it says, speaking of toxic leadership, is there a space being presented for agents to express their sentiments before they leave the organization? any avenue to address the issue before people leave?
That is a really good question. So I would say in our system, our area directors, I keep calling them regional, but we just changed that name too. Our area directors are really working on being better associated with what's going on in a local unit, and keeping that open door policy. So there is that relationship building that is going on. So agents in a local unit know that they can reach out to those administrators and talk through that process. But other than that, I'm not aware, at least in our system, of any intentionality behind remedying those relationships that may not be working out. Background on why several communities are now part of an area rather than, are you talking about district versus county structure? Yes. Okay, I will tell you, you want to be in a district because you become your own taxing entity, is how that works. So in a county, each year on an annual basis, we have to go and have a discussion with our county commissioners about our budget, and that's an annual debate. And some of those are not super supportive conversations when we look at local county budgets and what that might look like year to year. Whereas if you are in a district structure in our state, districts actually become a taxing entity and can set the mill levy. I could send you more information if you're interested in learning about that, but that's part of why we don't look into changing the law of a district structure, because we wouldn't want to take that away from our current system. Awesome. I'll try to see if I can pull up my thesis. If not, feel free to send me an email and that's probably going to be the easier thing here. I'll just shoot my email address, Alex, in the chat box.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I know if you look in Google Scholar, the title of my thesis is actually the presentation for this webinar. But if you don't want to go down that,
posted the link to it already.
oh, there we go. Thanks, Steve. I should have been prepared. Perfect. Okay. Any other questions? We're knocking on the door of, you did speak to this, but mention. For sure. So, our system used to kind of have an old school way of mentoring people, where when you joined our organization, we would assign you a one-on-one mentor. And that happened for many, many years. And we got to the point to where we were onboarding more people than we had folks who wanted to serve as mentors. Which many of your organizations may be in the same space. So as you can tell there, in about a year and a half time frame, we hired 98 new agents. So to go back to that structure of you're going to join and Kaitlyn's going to be your one-on-one mentor was just too overwhelming for our system. So instead we moved to a team structure where there's a group of, I would say 12 of us. And that's all geographic. There is a strategy to how we are assigned, and programmatic too. So we make sure we have programmatic representation, but it's really more of a team way to mentor folks. So someone might come to me for coalition work, for instance, because that's one of my expertise, but they're probably going to go to my colleague up north if they have administrative responsibilities. So it's really more about a person's expertise, not that any of us are experts, but our knowledge base versus forcing that one-on-one mentorship that honestly sometimes didn't work out. Like I mentored a lot of people and sometimes we didn't mesh well. And there were faults in that system too. Okay. Apologies if you've talked about this. It is not published yet, but we're working on that. Awesome. Any other questions? I won't hop off quite yet because I know I have some direct messages here, just in case I need to respond to any of those. But otherwise, you all get 5 more minutes back to your day.
Before you leave, though, thanks,
Oh,
Kaitlyn, for that
yeah.
wonderful presentation. A few things to cover yet. As you heard in the beginning, this has been recorded and it will be uploaded to the ESP YouTube site, and I'll email the link out. Kaitlyn's going to send me her PowerPoint. We'll get that out to you as well. I mentioned also that if you want to present a webinar, the RFP for that, I just put in the chat along with the conference RFP. The October conference is in Fort Worth, Texas. And then a reminder, our next webinar is February 10th, and it's entitled Get the Dish, Collaboration to Extend Extension's Educational Reach. And that actually has multiple presenters from multiple states. It'll be interesting to hear more of a multi-state program presentation as well. So thanks for your time today, everyone. Look forward to seeing you next month.